In the middle of a robbery, a young maid does the unthinkable to save her boss's son. Hiding the boy, she steps into a story filled with family secrets and conspiracies. As she uncovers what is truly happening, her life takes an unexpected turn. If this beautiful story of overcoming and love has interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching us from. Continuing. The light rain of that October Thursday fell gently on the gardens of the Armstrong Mansion, located in one of the most exclusive neighborhoods of New York City on the Upper East Side. The drops slid down the enormous windows of the living room, creating a trembling pattern that distorted the view of the purple wisteria planted around the property. Inside, protected from the chill that was beginning to settle over the city, Julia Miller was finishing folding the imported linen tablecloths, the ones used only on special occasions when the family received important guests for dinners she never attended, only served. At 23, Julia carried in her brown eyes a mixture of youth and premature responsibility. Her dark hair, always tied in a low bun during work hours, framed a delicate face with soft features that recalled the quiet beauty of her mother. Her hands, though young, already showed the signs of constant work, of the countless hours dedicated to keeping every inch of that house, which was not hers, but which, she knew better than any of its true owners, impeccable. She had grown up there. Not in the main mansion, of course, but in the staff house, a smaller building at the back of the property where she lived with her mother, Mrs. Rosa, the head housekeeper for the Armstrong family for over 20 years. Julia had known practically no other world beyond that universe, divided between the luxury of others and the simplicity of her own room, a small but cozy space where she kept her few belongings and her many dreams. Mrs. Rosa had always been a woman of grit, the kind that life teaches to be strong because there is no other choice. A widow since Julia was only 5, she had raised her daughter alone, always with dignity, always with her head held high, even when exhaustion weighed on her shoulders. She had worked for the Armstrong family since before Julia was born, and it was in that house that she built everything she had. Mrs. Rosa's loyalty to her employers was unshakable, almost as if it were part of her own identity. She taught her daughter that work dignified a person, that honesty was worth more than any fortune, and that respecting one's employers was a matter of principle. Julia had absorbed these lessons like a sponge. From the age of 15, when she began helping her mother with the household chores, she dedicated herself diligently to every task assigned to her. Washing, ironing, tidying, serving. Everything was done with care, with an attention to detail that made the difference between a job well done and a perfect job. She knew the preferences of each family member, knew exactly how Mr. Edward liked his coffee, strong and without sugar, knew that Mrs. Christine preferred white roses in the dining room arrangements, knew that little Gabriel hated broccoli and loved brownies. Gabriel. The boy was the light in that often somber house. At 12 years old, he had a sweet and curious personality, very different from what one would expect from a child raised amidst so much luxury and privilege. Perhaps because, in truth, Gabriel did not have as privileged a childhood as the money suggested. His biological mother had left when he was only 3, leaving behind a devastated husband and a son who barely remembered her face. Edward Armstrong never spoke of his first wife, and everyone in the house knew that this was a forbidden subject, a wound that remained open even after so many years. Christine had entered Edward's life 5 years later, like a gust of wind promising renewal. Beautiful, elegant, always impeccably dressed, she had won the businessman's heart with a facility that surprised everyone. The wedding was quick, lavish, and mentioned in the city's society columns. Christine Sinclair, from a traditional family but with a declining fortune, became Christine Armstrong, wife of one of the richest men in New York, owner of an import-export company that moved millions every month. For Gabriel, however, Christine was never truly a mother. She was polite, kept up appearances in public, but inside that house the boy felt the chill of a disguised indifference. Christine showed no genuine affection, was not interested in his school grades, did not ask about his day. It was as if Gabriel were just another piece of furniture in the house, necessary to complete the decor of the perfect family she insisted on displaying to society. Julia noticed all of this. She observed from her invisible place, from that space where the staff live without being seen, and her heart ached when she saw the boy alone in the library, reading his adventure books, creating imaginary worlds where there was perhaps more warmth than in that real home. She couldn't do much. It wasn't her place to interfere in the family's affairs, but whenever possible, she left a kind note with Gabriel's afternoon snack, or set aside the extra brownies she knew he loved. Their relationship was peculiar. Gabriel treated her with a rare kindness, always thanked her when she served him something, always greeted her when he saw her in the hallways. For Julia, that boy represented everything she wanted to protect in the world, an innocence that needed to be preserved despite everything. She saw in him the younger brother she never had, the child who deserved love and who, in some way, she tried to offer within her limitations. On that Thursday night, as she folded the tablecloths in the laundry room adjacent to the kitchen, Julia felt a different weight in the air. Edward Armstrong was in the mansion, locked in his second-floor office for hours. This in itself was unusual. The businessman spent most of his days in his office in Midtown, tending to the business. That had built his fortune. Seeing him at home during the week, especially so early, was strange. Stranger still was his condition. Julia had seen him briefly when he arrived in the afternoon, and the man's appearance had frightened her. Edward looked gaunt, with an unhealthy pallor that contrasted with the tan he usually maintained. He walked slowly, as if each step cost him immense effort, and his eyes, usually lively and attentive, seemed dull, distant. Mrs. Rosa had commented to her daughter in a low voice, while they prepared dinner, that the master had not been well for weeks. That he had been losing weight, losing energy, that something was consuming him from the inside out. The doctors he consulted found nothing concrete, only prescribed vitamins and recommended rest. But Edward continued to waste away, day after day, like a candle slowly burning out. Julia finished putting away the tablecloths and moved to the large kitchen, all clad in white marble and equipped with the best appliances money could buy. She began to wash the dinner dishes, a task that always calmed her. There was something meditative in the repetitive movement of her hands in the warm water, in the soft sound of the porcelain pieces being cleaned and rinsed. It was in these moments that she allowed her mind to wander, to think about her own dreams, even though she knew many of them would never come true. She dreamed of studying. She hadn't finished high school because she needed to work full-time to help her mother, but she held within her the burning desire to go back to school, perhaps take a vocational course, maybe even go to college. She dreamed of having her own house one day, a place that was truly hers, where she could hang pictures she liked, plant flowers in the garden, have friends over for coffee. She dreamed of seeing the ocean. She had never left New York, and the idea of seeing the sea, feeling the sand under her feet, was something that had enchanted her since childhood. But dreams, she had learned, were luxuries that didn't always fit into reality. Her reality was that kitchen, those dishes, that roof that was not hers but sheltered her life. And she had made peace with that, or at least she tried to every day. The clock on the wall read 10:15 at night when Julia finally finished the dishes. Mrs. Rosa had already retired, tired after a long day. The house was silent, only the sound of the rain, now falling harder outside, and the ticking of the clock filled the room. Christine had left earlier for a charity event, one of those parties where the women of New York high society gathered to raise funds for causes Julia suspected they didn't even know much about. Gabriel should be asleep in his room on the second floor. Edward was still locked in his office. Julia was drying her hands on a dish towel when she heard the first noise. It was a muffled sound, as if something heavy had fallen on the upper floor. She froze, listening intently, her heart accelerating for no apparent reason. Seconds later, another sound. This time, closer. Quick footsteps in the hallway leading to the main entrance. Something was wrong. Julia's intuition, that inner voice that had so often guided her in moments of uncertainty, screamed that something was very, very wrong. She dropped the towel and walked slowly toward the kitchen door, which opened onto the side corridor of the mansion. Her heart was pounding now, her palms beginning to sweat. It was then that she heard the scream, a muffled scream coming from somewhere in the house, followed by a crash that made the glasses in the cabinet tremble. Julia felt the blood run cold in her veins. Without a second thought, she turned off the kitchen light, plunging the room into a dimness broken only by the faint light coming from the corridor. She approached the door, breathing with difficulty, trying to control the panic that was beginning to set in. She peeked through the slightly ajar doorway, and what she saw left her, paralyzed. 3 men, all dressed in black, their faces partially covered, were walking down the main corridor of the house. They were carrying tools that Julia couldn't quite identify in the dim light, but which seemed designed to break down doors and pick locks. Intruders. The mansion was being invaded. Panic gave way to quick thinking. Julia retreated into the kitchen, her mind working frantically. She needed to warn someone, needed to call the police, needed to do something. But before she could move toward the phone, the kitchen door burst open. Julia stifled a scream, ready to face one of the intruders. But it was Gabriel who entered. The boy was in his pajamas, his eyes wide with terror, his lips trembling. He ran to her and clung to her waist, burying his face in her apron. "Gabriel," Julia murmured, crouching down to his level, trying to sound calm despite her own fear. "What are you doing here? You should be in your room." The boy's voice came out muffled against the fabric of the apron. "There are men in the house. They're breaking everything. I heard a noise and left my room, and I saw them in the hallway. Christine was arguing with one of them upstairs near my dad's office." Julia's heart raced even faster. Christine was in the house. She should have been at the charity event. Why had she come back? And why would she be arguing with the intruders? Something didn't make sense, but there was no time to process this information now. Julia looked around the kitchen, searching for a hiding place. Her eyes landed on the large, solid wood table in the center of the room, covered by a tablecloth that reached the floor. It wasn't perfect, but it was the best they had at the moment. "Gabriel, listen," she said, holding the boy's face between her hands and forcing him to look into her eyes. "You need to be very quiet. Very, very quiet. We're going to hide under the table, and you can't make a sound, understand? Not a sound." The boy nodded, his eyes still filled with tears. Julia guided him to the table, and they squeezed underneath, settling into the tight space. The tablecloth concealed them reasonably well, but anyone who entered the kitchen and looked closely could easily discover them. They stayed there, huddled together, Gabriel's body pressed against Julia's, who could feel the boy trembling. She put an arm around him, trying to convey a security she did not feel. The silence was broken only by the sounds coming from the rest of the house: heavy footsteps, doors being opened and closed, furniture being dragged. The intruders were looking for something. Minutes passed like hours. Julia kept her breathing controlled, mentally counting her inhalations and exhalations, a technique her mother had taught her when she was little and afraid of thunder. Gabriel was calmer now, but still clinging to her tightly. It was then that the boy whispered, so low that Julia almost didn't hear. "My dad gave me something today, before he went into his office. He said it was very important and that I couldn't show it to anyone." Julia looked at the boy in the dimness. What was it? Gabriel reached into his pajama pocket and pulled out a small object. Even in the faint light that reached under the table, Julia could see it was a locket. It looked old, made of silver, with delicate details engraved on its surface. The boy opened it, and inside there was a small golden key, attached by a thin chain. "My dad said that if anything happened to him, I needed to keep this and never let Christine find out," whispered Gabriel, his voice laden with fear and confusion. "He said there's a hidden safe, and that this key opens it. He said that inside is the truth about everything." Julia felt a shiver run down her spine. "The truth about what, Gabriel?" "I don't know," the boy replied, tears streaming down his face again. "He just said it was about our family, about bad things that are happening, and that I needed to be strong." "Julia, what's happening? Why are people breaking into our house? Where's my dad?" Before Julia could answer, the kitchen door opened again. This time, it wasn't Gabriel. Heavy footsteps entered the room, and through the small gap between the tablecloth and the floor, Julia saw the black boots of at least 2 men. Her heart stopped for a second. "Checked in here?" said a deep, rough voice. "Just dishes," replied another voice. "Let's go upstairs. The boss lady said the safe is in the office." Julia and Gabriel huddled even closer, trying to make themselves invisible. The men walked through the kitchen, opening cabinets, but in a hurried, superficial way. They were there to find something specific, not to steal appliances or silverware. After a few seconds that felt like an eternity, the men left the kitchen, closing the door behind them. Julia waited a few more moments before breathing a sigh of relief. Gabriel was now trembling violently, in shock. They needed to get out of there. They needed to find help. But how? The police should probably be on their way already. The mansion's alarms had surely been triggered. Or had they not? What if the intruders had disabled the security system before entering? What if they were professionals who knew exactly what they were doing? Julia made a decision. "We're getting out of here, Gabriel. We're going to the staff house, where my mum is. She'll know what to do." "But what about my dad?" asked the boy, his voice choked. Julia hesitated. Edward was in the office, exactly where the intruders seemed to be heading. She couldn't let Gabriel go up there, couldn't expose the boy to even greater danger. But she also couldn't just ignore the fact that her employer might be in trouble. "You're coming with me to the staff house," she decided, keeping her voice firm. "And from there we'll call the police and get help. Everything will be okay, Gabriel, I promise." She didn't know if she could keep that promise, but she had to say something to calm the boy. They carefully emerged from under the table, alert to any sound. The kitchen was still empty. Julia took Gabriel's hand and led him to the door that opened onto the side garden, the same one they used every morning to start their work. The rain had intensified outside. The night was dark, illuminated only by the garden lights that created pools of brightness among the shadows of the trees. Julia opened the door slowly, making sure no one was outside. The cold night air entered through the opening, bringing the smell of wet earth. "Let's go," she whispered. They ran out, crossing the garden toward the back of the property. The grass was slippery from the rain, and Gabriel stumbled twice, but Julia held him, preventing him from falling. Her heart was beating so hard it felt like it would explode, and her lungs burned with the effort of running, while trying not to make a sound. The staff house was about 50 yards from the main mansion, a simple, single-story but well-kept building. Julia pushed open the door, which was always unlocked, and entered, pulling Gabriel in behind her. "Mum," she called, still in a low but urgent voice. "Mum, wake up!" There was no answer. Julia turned on the living room light and ran to Mrs. Rosa's room. The door was ajar, and when she looked inside, her heart stopped. Mrs. Rosa was lying on the floor next to the bed. There was blood on her forehead, and she seemed unconscious. Julia ran to her mother, kneeling beside her, her hands trembling as she checked for a pulse. It was weak, but it was there. Mrs. Rosa was alive. "Mum! Mum! Wake up!" Julia pleaded, touching the woman's face. "What happened?" Gabriel was at the bedroom door, his eyes wide with horror. "Julia, is she okay?" Julia didn't know. The wound on Mrs. Rosa's head didn't look very deep, but she was unconscious, and that wasn't a good sign. She needed urgent medical help. It was at that moment that Mrs. Rosa groaned and slowly opened her eyes. Her vision was blurry, and it took her a few seconds to recognize her daughter. "Julia." "I'm here, Mom. What happened? Who did this to you?" Mrs. Rosa tried to sit up, but Julia held her down. For a moment, they just looked at each other, the pain and fear visible in both their eyes. "They came here first," Mrs. Rosa whispered, her voice weak. "Two men. They wanted to know where the master's safe was. I told them I didn't know anything, and they hurt me." Tears streamed down Julia's face. "We're getting out of here, Mom. We'll take Gabriel and leave, find help." But Mrs. Rosa grabbed her daughter's arm with surprising strength. "No, you need to listen. You need to know the truth." "What truth, Mom?" Mrs. Rosa looked at Gabriel, who was still standing at the door, and then turned her eyes back to Julia. "Mr. Edward is being poisoned for months. I found out yesterday when I found the vials hidden in Mrs. Christine's room. I was going to tell him today, but I didn't have the courage. And now all this is happening." Julia felt as if the floor had disappeared from under her feet. Poisoned. Christine. The pieces began to fall into place in her mind, forming a terrible puzzle. Edward's illness, The break-in, the men looking for the safe, Christine arguing with the intruders. It wasn't a common break-in. It was a plan. A plan to take what belonged to Edward Armstrong. And Gabriel, little Gabriel, was at the center of it all, with that locket and that key his father had given him. Julia looked at the boy, who stared back at her with eyes full of tears and confusion. In that moment she knew there was no turning back. Her life, her quiet, invisible existence in that house was over. Now she had a choice to make. She could try to hide, wait for it all to pass, hope the authorities would resolve the situation. Or she could act. She looked at Gabriel again. At that boy who had always been kind to her, who deserved more than a life surrounded by lies and danger. And she made her decision. "We're leaving New York," she said, her voice firm despite her fear. "The three of us. We'll go somewhere safe, and from there we'll find out what's... In that safe we'll find out the whole truth and we'll get justice." Mrs. Rosa looked at her with a mixture of pride and concern. "But Julia, you'll get into huge trouble. They'll think you kidnapped the boy." "I don't care," Julia replied, surprising herself with her own courage. "I can't leave him here. I can't let them harm him, and I won't let them keep harming Mr. Edward." She stood up, helped her mother sit on the bed, and checked the wound again. It wasn't as serious as it first appeared. Mrs. Rosa would be okay, at least physically. "You stay here," Julia told her mother. "When the police arrive, tell them what you know. Tell them about the poison, about everything. But don't tell them where I went with Gabriel. Promise me." Mrs. Rosa hesitated, but then nodded. "I promise. But be careful, daughter. These people are dangerous. They won't stop until they get what they want." "I know," Julia said. "That's why I can't let them win." She went to her room and grabbed a small backpack. She stuffed in some clothes, documents, the little money she had saved. Gabriel watched her closely, still in shock, but beginning to understand that something very serious was happening. "Julia, where are we going?" he asked. "Far away from here, to a place where you'll be safe. And then we're going to find out what your father wanted you to know. We're going to find out the truth." Gabriel nodded, and for the first time since it all began, Julia saw a flicker of determination in the boy's eyes. He put his hand in his pocket and clutched the locket, as if it were a protective talisman. Outside, sirens began to wail in the distance. The police were arriving at the mansion. But Julia knew that didn't mean they were safe. It only meant that time was running out. They left through the back door of the staff house, the one that led to a narrow path that took them to a side street outside the main gates of the property. The rain continued to fall, washing their faces, mixing with tears of fear and uncertainty. As they ran through the dark New York night, Julia didn't look back. She couldn't, because she knew that if she did, she would see everything she was leaving behind, the only life she had ever known, the mother she loved, the security of a predictable routine. All of that remained in that mansion, in those gardens she had helped care for, in that kitchen where she had washed thousands of dishes. But ahead of her, holding her hand tightly, was Gabriel. And in that moment, protecting that boy, discovering the truth, and doing what was right, seemed more important than anything she was leaving behind. The rain fell harder now, soaking them completely as they ran toward the unknown. And Julia, the invisible young maid who had spent her life serving others, took the first step on a journey that would change not only her destiny, but the destinies of everyone around her. The Port Authority bus terminal at 4 in the morning was a world unto itself. Fluorescent lights flickered intermittently over the plastic benches where people from all walks of life waited for their buses, each with their own story, their own destinations. The smell of reheated coffee mixed with the odor of diesel fuel from the platforms, creating an atmosphere that oscillated between welcoming and suffocating. Julia and Gabriel were sitting in a discreet corner, away from the security cameras. She knew were everywhere. The boy was huddled beside her, still wearing his pajamas under an old sweatshirt she had managed to buy at a 24-hour convenience store. Her own hair was loose now, wet from the rain, falling irregularly over her shoulders. She didn't recognize herself in the reflection of the windows. She looked like someone else. Maybe she was. The last few hours had been a blur of quick decisions and constant fear. After leaving the Armstrong property, Julia had hailed a taxi on the nearest avenue, giving the driver a random address in the city center. During the ride, she had kept Gabriel crouched on the back seat, pretending he was sleepy, while her own heart beat so loudly she was sure the driver could hear it. She didn't have a real plan. She just knew they needed to get out of New York, at least for a while, until she better understood what was happening, until she found out what was in the safe that had caused this whole situation. Gabriel held the locket inside his sweatshirt pocket, his fingers squeezing the metal as if it were a shield against all the danger surrounding them. Julia looked at the electronic board displaying the bus schedules. There was one leaving for Philadelphia in 40 minutes. Philadelphia was big enough for them to get lost for a while, but not so far that it would consume all the money she had. It was only $1,200, her savings from months of work kept for an emergency she never imagined would be like this. "Gabriel," she whispered, gently touching the boy's shoulder, "we're going to Philadelphia. It's a big city. We'll be able to hide there for a while as we figure out what to do." The boy looked at her with those frightened eyes, but he was trying to be brave. Julia saw in them a flicker of trust, as if Gabriel were placing all his faith in her that things would work out. That responsibility weighed on her shoulders like a ton of bricks. "Do you think my dad is okay?" Gabriel asked, his voice small and full of worry. Julia didn't know what to say. Edward Armstrong was being poisoned, according to Mrs. Rosa. The intruders were looking for the safe. Christine was involved in all of it. The situation was far more complex and dangerous than she could fully process. But she couldn't transfer all that weight onto a 12-year-old boy. "Your dad is strong, Gabriel. And now the police are there. They'll take care of him. Our priority now is to keep you safe and find out what's in that safe. That's what your dad asked for, wasn't it? For you to keep the key and find out the truth." Gabriel nodded slowly, wiping his face with his hand to clear the tears that still insisted on falling. He said, "I needed to be strong, that I needed to trust the right people. I think you're one of the right people, Julia." Those words touched something deep in Julia's heart. All her life she had been just the maid, the one who cleaned, the one who served, the invisible one. No one had ever placed such a great, vital vote of confidence in her, and there was this boy looking at her as if she could move mountains, protect him from all the evil in the world. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility, but also a strange sense of purpose. For the first time in her life she felt she was doing something that truly mattered, something that went beyond folding tablecloths or washing dishes. "I'm going to buy the tickets," she said, standing up. "You stay here. Don't move from this spot, understand? I'll be right back." Julia walked to the ticket counter, discreetly checking if anyone was watching. The employee who served her had tired eyes and an expression of someone who had seen it all at that bus terminal. She sold the 2 tickets without asking questions, without even looking properly at Julia's face. Sometimes the indifference of big cities had its advantages. When she returned to where Gabriel was, she found the boy talking quietly with an elderly woman sitting next to him. Julia's heart sped up, but the woman just smiled kindly at her. "What a polite boy you have," the woman said. "He said you're going to visit his grandmother in Philadelphia." Julia forced a smile, placing her hand on Gabriel's shoulder. "Yes, my mother isn't doing very well, so we're going to visit her." The woman nodded in understanding. "It's good to have family to take care of you. Enjoy your trip, dears." Julia thanked her and guided Gabriel away, whispering in his ear, "You can't talk to strangers, Gabriel, not now, it's dangerous." "Sorry," the boy replied, "genuinely sorry." She just looked so lonely, and she was being kind. Julia sighed. Gabriel had a huge heart, even in the midst of all this. But kindness could be dangerous when you were on the run. The next 2 hours dragged on with torturous slowness. Julia bought 2 sandwiches and 2 juices at a terminal snack bar, spending money she knew she needed to save, but Gabriel had to eat. The boy barely touched his food, just nibbled at the edges of the bread, staring blankly into space. Julia went to a payphone and dialed the number of the staff house. It rang several times until someone answered. It was Mrs. Rosa. "Mom," Julia said, relieved to hear the woman's voice. "How are you?" I'm fine, honey. The police are here. They asked about you and Gabriel. I told them I didn't know anything, that when I woke up, you were already gone. Mrs. Rosa's voice was low, as if she was speaking in secret. They found the intruders. 4 men, but Mrs. Christine is gone. No one knows where she is. Julia felt a chill. Christine had disappeared. That only confirmed her involvement in everything. And Mr. Edward? There was a pause on the other end of the line. Julia heard her mother take a deep breath before answering. He's in the hospital. They said he was found unconscious in his office. The doctors are investigating, but it seems it really was poisoning, Julia. Everything I feared was true. Tears burned Julia's eyes. Edward Armstrong, the man who had always been distant but never cruel, was fighting for his life because of his own wife's greed. And Gabriel, his son, was here with her on the run, not even knowing if his father would survive. Mum, I need to find out what's in that safe. Gabriel has the key. His father gave it to him for a reason. There must be proof, something that can incriminate Christine and save Mr. Edward. Where are you? Mrs. Rosa asked. Julia hesitated. The less her mother knew, the better, the safer. We're okay. I'll call again when I can. I love you, Mum. I love you too, honey. Be careful and take care of the boy. Julia hung up with a heavy heart. She returned to where Gabriel was and sat beside him. The boy looked at her with those eyes that tried to be brave, but revealed all the fear he felt. My dad's in the hospital, isn't he? He asked, as if he already knew the answer. Julia wasn't going to lie to him. She nodded slowly. He is, but the doctors are taking care of him. He's going to be okay, Gabriel. Because of the poison. Julia was surprised. You heard what I said to my mother? I heard when your mother spoke to you, back at the staff house, about Christine poisoning my dad. The boy wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. I always knew she didn't like me, but I didn't know she could do something so awful to my dad. Why? Why would she do that? How do you explain to a 12-year-old child that money, power, and greed could turn people into monsters? How do you make a boy understand that the woman who sat at the dinner table with him every night was capable of slowly poisoning his father, just to get an inheritance? Sometimes people do very bad things when they want something that isn't theirs, Julia said, choosing her words carefully. Your dad must have found out something, or suspected something, and that's why he gave you this key. He trusts you, Gabriel. He trusts you to do the right thing. Gabriel took the locket out of his pocket and opened it, looking at the small golden key that shone under the fluorescent light of the bus terminal. It's so small. How can something so small be so important? Sometimes the most important things fit in the smallest spaces, Julia replied. Like love, like truth, like courage. All of that fits right here. She touched his chest over his heart. In a very small place, but it makes all the difference. The call to board the bus to Philadelphia echoed through the loudspeakers. Julia picked up her backpack and extended her hand to Gabriel. Let's go. They boarded along with other passengers, mostly workers returning home after the night shift, some students who probably had early classes. No one paid them any attention, no one asked questions. There were just 2 more anonymous passengers on another bus trip. Julia chose seats at the back of the bus, near the window. Gabriel sat next to her and immediately rested his head on her shoulder. Exhaustion was finally overcoming fear. In a few minutes, the boy was asleep, his breathing soft and regular. Julia looked out the window as the bus left the terminal and entered the interstate. New York City slowly faded behind them, its countless lights twinkling in the pre-dawn darkness. She was leaving the only city she had ever known, the only life she had ever had, and she didn't know when or if she would return. But she couldn't think about that now. She had a mission: protect Gabriel, discover the truth, get justice. For the first time in her life, she felt she was in control of her own destiny, even if that destiny was uncertain and frightening. The bus continued down the highway, cutting through the night. Julia closed her eyes for a moment, allowing herself to rest. But sleep didn't come. Her mind was working frantically, trying to piece together the puzzle, to understand all the parts of the story. Edward Armstrong was a rich man, but from what she knew he was also honest in his business. Mrs. Rosa had always spoken well of him, always commented that despite being distant, the master was fair. So why would someone poison him? Why would Christine do that? The obvious answer was money. With Edward dead, Christine would inherit the fortune. But there was something more, there had to be. The intruders were specifically looking for the safe. They wanted what was inside. And Edward had given the key to Gabriel, not to guards or lawyers, but to his 12-year-old son. What would a rich and powerful man hide in a secret safe? Documents, proof of something. Maybe secrets about his company, about shady deals, about dangerous people. Or maybe proof against Christine, evidence she was desperately trying to destroy. Julia opened her eyes again and looked at Gabriel, who was now sleeping peacefully, his face relaxed in the innocence of sleep. That boy carried with him the key to unraveling everything, and she, Julia Miller, a simple maid who had never had anything important in her entire life, was now the guardian of that key and that boy. The sky was beginning to lighten when the bus finally entered Philadelphia. The city was waking up slowly, still quiet at that early Saturday morning hour. Julia gently woke Gabriel and they got off the bus at the terminal, blending in with the few disembarking passengers. "Now what?" Gabriel asked, rubbing his eyes. "Now we find a place to stay. Somewhere discreet, where we can think and plan our next steps." They walked through the streets of downtown Philadelphia, passing by still-closed shops, bakeries that were just starting to open. Julia stopped at one of them and bought fresh bread and coffee with milk for both of them. They sat on a park bench to eat, watching the city come to life around them. "Julia," Gabriel said after a while, still chewing a piece of bread, "do you think we did the right thing running away like this?" Julia looked at him, seeing the doubt in his young eyes. It was a fair question, a legitimate concern. They had fled without notifying the authorities, without waiting to see what would happen. To many it would look like she had kidnapped the boy. "I think we did what we had to do," she replied honestly. "Your dad gave you that key for a reason, Gabriel. He didn't trust anyone else, not the police, not lawyers. He trusted you. And if we had stayed there, Christine or whoever is working with her would have probably gotten the key. Maybe they would have even hurt you to get it." Gabriel swallowed hard, processing her words. "So we're like fugitives now. We're people trying to do the right thing in a very complicated situation," Julia corrected. "And we're going to find out the truth. We're going to find what's in that safe. And then we're going to hand everything over to the right authorities, the ones who will actually bring justice." They finished eating, and Julia threw the coffee cups in a nearby trash can. They needed to find a place to stay, but they couldn't go to a conventional hotel. The police were probably already looking for them, especially for Gabriel. The disappearance of a millionaire businessman's son would not go unnoticed. It was then that Julia remembered something. She had a distant cousin who lived in Philadelphia, Beatrice. They hadn't seen each other in years, since they were teenagers, but Julia knew that Beatrice worked as a teacher in the city. Would she still be at the same address? Would she help? It was a risk, but they needed help. They couldn't stay on the streets indefinitely. Julia found a payphone and dialed the number she remembered by heart, Beatrice's old cell phone number that she had jotted down years ago in an address book she still kept. The phone rang several times, and Julia was already losing hope when someone answered. "Hello? B? It's Julia. Julia Miller, your cousin." There was a surprised pause on the other end. "Julia? Wow. How long has it been? Are you okay? What's going on?" Julia took a deep breath. "B, I need help. I'm in a complicated situation, and I have no one else to turn to. Do you still live in Philly?" "Yes, I still do. Julia, are you okay? You're scaring me." "I'll explain everything in person. Can you meet me?" "I promise I'll explain everything." Beatrice hesitated, but then gave an address for a coffee shop downtown. Julia mentally noted it and thanked her, promising to be there in half an hour. When she hung up, Gabriel was looking at her curiously. "Who is that?" "My cousin. We haven't seen each other in a long time, but she's a good person. Or she was when we were younger. I hope she still is." They took a bus to the address Beatrice had given. The coffee shop was small and cozy, with wooden tables and a smell of freshly brewed coffee that reminded Julia of simpler, quieter mornings. Beatrice was already there, sitting at a corner table, and when she saw Julia, she stood up immediately. The two hugged, and Julia felt an unexpected relief at seeing a familiar face, someone from her past, from when things were less complicated. Beatrice was different, more mature, with short hair and modern glasses, but she still had the same kind smile Julia remembered. "Julia, what is going on?" Beatrice asked as soon as they sat down, looking from Julia to Gabriel. "Who is this boy?" Julia took a deep breath and began to tell her story. She told her about her job at the Armstrong mansion, about the break-in, about the locket and the key, about Edward being poisoned, about Christine and the men looking for the safe. She told her about their escape, about the fear, about the responsibility she now carried to protect Gabriel and discover the truth. Beatrice listened in silence, her eyes growing wider as the story unfolded. When Julia finished, her cousin was silent for a few seconds, processing everything. "Julia, you realize this is very serious, don't you? That you could be accused of kidnapping right this moment." "I know, but I couldn't leave him there, Bea. They would have taken the key, maybe even hurt Gabriel. I had no choice." Beatrice looked at Gabriel, who kept his eyes down, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Then she looked back at Julia. "And what do you plan to do now?" "Find out where this safe is, find out what's inside it, and use that to prove everything that's happening to save Gabriel's father and to get us out of this situation. And how are you going to do that?" Julia had no answer. "Not yet. Honestly, I don't know, but I'll find a way. I have to find a way." Beatrice sighed, ran a hand through her hair, clearly torn between helping her cousin and avoiding getting into such a huge mess. But then she looked at Gabriel again, at that boy who was obviously scared and lost, and her face softened. "You can stay with me," she said finally. "I have a small apartment, but there's room. But Julia, you need to be careful. This is much bigger than you think." "I know," Julia replied, feeling gratitude wash over her. "Thank you, Bea. Truly." Beatrice nodded and called the waitress to order coffees for the three of them. While they waited, Gabriel finally spoke. "I'm sorry for causing trouble," he said quietly. "It wasn't my intention." Beatrice smiled gently at him. "You're not causing trouble, sweetie. None of this is your fault. You're just a kid caught up in an adult situation. My dad always said that being an adult meant making tough decisions," Gabriel continued. "I think I understand what he meant now." Julia touched the boy's hand on the table, squeezing it gently. "You're being very brave, Gabriel. Your dad would be proud." Those words seemed to give the boy strength. He sat up a little straighter, wiped his eyes, and nodded. "Then we need to find out where the safe is. My dad mentioned once, a long time ago, about an office he had at the company, a place that was just his, where he kept important things. Maybe the safe is there." Julia and Beatrice exchanged glances. "Armstrong. Imports was located where?" Beatrice took out her phone and quickly searched. "There's an office in Midtown Manhattan in New York." New York. Julia felt her stomach tighten. They would have to go back to the city they had just fled. It was risky, very risky, but it might be the only way to find out the truth. "Let's come up with a plan," Beatrice said, showing a determination Julia didn't expect. "If we're going to do this, let's do it right, carefully, and with a plan to get out of this alive and free." Julia nodded. For the first time since it all began, she felt that maybe, just maybe, she could actually make this work. With Beatrice's help, with Gabriel's courage, and with the truth she hoped would be revealed, perhaps she could change all their destinies. They left the coffee shop and went to Beatrice's apartment, a small but welcoming place in a simple building. There they sat at the living room table and began to draw up a plan. How would they get into the office? How would they find the safe? How would they get out without being caught? It was scary, it was dangerous, but it was necessary. And Julia, for the first time in her life, felt she was on the right path, even if that path was filled with uncertainty and peril. The next 3 days in Beatrice's apartment were a strange mix of intense planning and surprisingly calm moments. Gabriel slept on the living room sofa, wrapped in blankets Beatrice had taken from her own room. Julia shared the room with her cousin, the two of them talking late into the night about old times, about how life had taken them down such different paths and now inexplicably had brought them back together. During the day, while Beatrice taught her online high school math classes, Julia and Gabriel researched everything they could about Armstrong Imports and Christine Sinclair Armstrong. What they discovered was both revealing and disturbing. Edward Armstrong had built his empire from scratch, starting as a simple customs broker and, over 30 years, transforming his small operation into one of the largest import-export companies in the country. The company had contracts with dozens of countries, mainly in Asia and Europe, and moved millions of dollars monthly. Edward was known in the market as a tough but fair businessman, someone whose word was worth more than any signed contract. Christine, on the other hand, came from a traditional New York family that had lost its fortune 2 generations ago. The Sinclairs had once owned vast properties upstate, but mismanagement and debt had reduced the family to an important name without the money that used to accompany it. Christine had grown up hearing stories of a glorious past, raised to believe she deserved a certain kind of life, even if she didn't have the resources to sustain it. When she met Edward at a charity event 5 years ago, she saw in him the opportunity to regain the status she felt was hers by right. The courtship was quick, calculated, and Edward, still vulnerable after years of loneliness following the departure of his first wife, fell for Christine's charms like a leaf in autumn. But there was something else in their research. Julia discovered, through old articles on society gossip sites, that Christine had been married before, a brief marriage to a Portuguese businessman that had ended under nebulous circumstances. The man had suffered a sudden and severe health problem, never fully explained, and had passed away months later. Christine had inherited a small fortune, which she had quickly spent, and then she met Edward. The pattern was there, clear as day. Julia felt a shiver run down her spine as she connected the dots. Christine had a history. Edward was not her first victim. Gabriel was silent when Julia shared this information with him, but his eyes filled with tears that he bravely tried to hold back. The truth about who the woman who sat at the table with them, who pretended to be part of the family, really was more painful than anything the boy could have imagined. "Julia," Gabriel said that night as the three of them ate instant noodles that Beatrice had prepared, "my dad is a good person. He works a lot, it's true, and he's not always around as much as I'd like, but he's never been cruel, never been unfair. Why would someone like Christine do this to him?" "Because there are people in this world who only think about themselves," Beatrice answered gently, stirring the noodles on her plate. "People who see others only as means to get what they want. Your father probably never imagined that the woman he married was capable of something like this." Julia looked at the boy and saw in him a forced maturity that no child should have. Gabriel was learning, in the hardest way possible, that the world was not always fair, that people were not always what they seemed. "But your dad gave you that key for a reason," Julia continued, trying to bring hope back into the boy's eyes. "He trusted you to do what's right, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to find the safe, we're going to discover the truth, and we're going to make her pay for what she's done." Gabriel nodded, discreetly wiping his eyes. "When are we going to New York?" Beatrice and Julia looked at each other. They had spent the last 2 days planning every detail. Beatrice, with her analytical math teacher's mind, had drawn up a plan that minimized the risks, at least as much as possible. They would go to New York on Sunday, the day the company office would be empty. Beatrice knew someone who worked security in the building, a former student who owed her a few favors. With his help, they could get access to the floor where Edward's private office was located. "Sunday," Beatrice replied. "In 2 days. That gives us time to prepare better, and for you," she looked at Gabriel, "to rest a bit. You need to be strong for this." Gabriel agreed, but Julia could see the anxiety in his eyes. With each day that passed away from New York, away from his father, the boy became more tense, more worried. He would call the hospital using Beatrice's cell phone, pretending to be a distant relative, just to find out how Edward was. The news was always the same, critical but stable condition. The doctors were still investigating the cause of his condition, but at least he was alive. Christine, according to the news they followed online, was still missing. The police were looking for her for questioning, but she seemed to have vanished. The newspapers speculated about a possible kidnapping of both her and Gabriel, but the investigations were going nowhere. The mansion remained sealed off under police investigation. On Saturday morning, Beatrice went out shopping, and Julia was left alone with Gabriel in the apartment. The boy was sitting on the sofa, fidgeting with the locket that now rarely left his hands. "Can I see?" Julia asked, sitting next to him. Gabriel opened the locket and showed her the small golden key. It was delicate, with elaborate details on the part that would be inserted into the lock. It was definitely not an ordinary key. It was old, custom-made for a specific safe. "Did your dad say anything else about the safe?" Julia questioned. "Any detail could help us." Gabriel thought for a moment, closing his eyes as if trying to remember every word of the last conversation he had with his father. He said the safe was in a place where only he went, a place that had been his since he started the company. He said that inside was everything I needed to know about our family, about the past, about... He opened his eyes and looked at Julia. "About my mother." "Your mother?" Julia repeated, surprised. "Your real mother?" Gabriel nodded. "My dad never talks about her, never. It's like she never existed. But sometimes I see him looking at a photo he keeps in his wallet, a photo of a beautiful woman with dark hair. I know it's my mother, and I know something happened to her, something my dad has never been able to get over." Julia felt her heart ache. There were layers to this story she had never imagined. The safe didn't just hold evidence against Christine, it held family secrets, truths that Edward had never been able to share with his son. "We'll find out everything, Gabriel," Julia promised. "Your dad trusted you to do this, and I'm going to help you fulfill this mission." The boy moved closer to Julia and hugged her, a tight hug from someone who had been holding back emotions for days. Julia returned the hug, feeling the weight of responsibility, but also a genuine love for this boy whom fate had placed in her path. When Beatrice returned from shopping, she brought not only food, but also some new clothes for Gabriel and Julia. Discreet, dark clothes, appropriate for someone who needed to go unnoticed. "Tomorrow we go to New York," she announced, putting away the groceries. "My former student Daniel managed to get us access to the building. He'll be on duty tomorrow night, and he can give us 15 minutes in Mr. Edwards' office. After that he can't help us anymore. It would be too risky for him." 15 minutes, Julia murmured. "Is that enough time?" "It has to be," Beatrice replied. "It's all we have." That night, Julia barely slept. She tossed and turned in bed, imagining all the possible scenarios. What if they didn't find the safe? What if they found it but the key didn't fit? What if they got caught? The possibilities multiplied in her mind like an endless echo. "You're nervous," Beatrice said in the dark, her soft voice coming from the other bed. "I'm terrified," Julia admitted. "I've never done anything like this in my life, Bea. I'm just a maid. What am I doing trying to unravel conspiracies and find secret safes?" "You're doing what's right," Beatrice replied, "and that's more important than anything else. Remember when we were kids and you always defended the smaller ones on the playground? You've always been like this, Julia. You've always had this heart that can't see injustice without doing something about it." Julia smiled in the dark, remembering those simpler times. Defending kids on the playground was one thing. Facing criminals and conspirators was completely different, but Beatrice was right. Julia couldn't live with herself if she abandoned Gabriel now. If she gave up on discovering the truth. There was something inside her, a strength she didn't even know she possessed, that pushed her forward even when everything seemed impossible. Sunday dawned with a grey sky over Philadelphia. Julia woke up early, her stomach in knots with nervousness. Beatrice was already in the kitchen making coffee and toast for the three of them. Gabriel appeared minutes later, with dark circles under his eyes that betrayed that he hadn't slept well either. But there was determination in his eyes, a strength Julia hadn't seen before. "I'm ready," the boy said simply, sitting at the table. They ate in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. After breakfast, Beatrice gathered them in the living room. "Let's review the plan one last time," she said, picking up a notebook where she had jotted down all the details. "We'll arrive in New York around 3 in the afternoon. We'll go straight to a mall near the office and wait there until 7 in the evening. Daniel will be on duty from 7 to 7 on Monday morning. He'll let us in through the garage and take us up to the executive floor using the service elevator. We'll have 15 minutes to find the safe, open it, take what we need, and get out." "And what if someone else is in the building?" Julia asked. "On Sunday nights, the building is practically empty, just security and cleaning, and Daniel will make sure there's no one on our floor during those 15 minutes. "And after?" Gabriel questioned. "After," Beatrice replied. "We come back to Philadelphia immediately. We don't stay in New York. It's too risky. And then, depending on what we find in the safe, we decide our next steps." Julia took a deep breath. The plan was solid, considering the circumstances, but there were so many variables, so many things that could go wrong. "We'll do it," she said, more to herself than to the others. "We have to do it." They took the bus to New York at noon. The return trip seemed longer than the one coming, each minute dragging on as Julia watched the landscape through the window. Philadelphia gave way to the suburbs of New York, which eventually turned into the concrete jungle of the largest city in the country. When they finally got off at the Port Authority terminal, Julia felt strange. She was back in her city, but as a fugitive. People passed by her, thousands of lives happening simultaneously, all oblivious to the drama she was living. They took the subway to a mall in Midtown, where they spent the next few hours trying to look normal. Beatrice bought movie tickets for some random film, and the three of them sat in the dark theater, pretending to watch while their minds were elsewhere entirely. When they left the cinema, it was already 6:30. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink. It was a beautiful evening, the kind of evening when Julia used to finish her work at the mansion and sit for a few minutes in the garden, enjoying the peace of the end of the day. It felt like a lifetime ago. They walked the 15 minutes to the Armstrong Imports building, a modern glass and steel skyscraper with 20 floors in the heart of the business district. Daniel was waiting for them at the garage entrance, a young man of maybe 25 in an impeccable security uniform and a nervous look. "Professor," he greeted Beatrice, shaking her hand quickly. 15 minutes, no more. If anyone finds out I let you in, I lose my job." "We understand, Daniel. Thank you for doing this." He guided them through the underground garage, constantly checking around to make sure no one was watching. They got into a service elevator, and Daniel pressed the button for the 15th floor. "Mr. Armstrong's private office is at the end of the hall on the left," he explained as the elevator ascended. "The door should be locked, but He took a key ring from his pocket and handed it to Beatrice. "Managed to get this master key. It opens all the doors on the floor." When the elevator stopped and the doors opened, Julia felt her heart race. This was it. There was no turning back. "Good luck," Daniel whispered, holding the doors open as the three of them exited. The hallway was lit only by emergency lights, casting long shadows on the walls. Julia held Gabriel's hand as they followed Beatrice to the end of the hall. The door to Edward's office had a golden plaque with his name engraved on it. Beatrice inserted the key and turned. The door opened with a soft click, revealing a spacious and elegantly decorated room. There was a large mahogany desk, shelves full of books and documents, paintings on the walls, and a panoramic view of New York through the glass windows. Gabriel entered first, looking around as if searching for something familiar. Julia and Beatrice followed, closing the door behind them. "Where do we start?" Beatrice asked, looking around the room that seemed to have 1,000 possible places to hide a safe. "My dad said it was in a place that was only his," Gabriel recalled, walking slowly around the room. "A place from when he started the company." Julia followed the boy's gaze and noticed on the wall opposite the desk a series of framed photographs. They were old photos, showing Edward in different stages of his career. In one of them he was young, maybe in his early 20s, standing in front of a small office with a sign that read Armstrong Brokers. Gabriel approached the photos, studying each one carefully. Then his eyes landed on a specific photo. It was Edward with a beautiful dark-haired woman, both smiling at the camera. Behind them, partially visible in the photo, was a painting on the wall. Julia moved closer and looked at the photo more carefully. The painting in the photo was of an old ship sailing on the ocean, and there on the wall of the current office was the same painting. "Gabriel," she said, pointing to the painting on the wall. "Could that be it?" The boy ran to the painting and tried to take it off the wall. It was heavy, but with Julia's help, they managed to lift it and carefully place it on the floor. Behind it, embedded in the wall, was a small silver metal safe. "We found it," Beatrice whispered, checking her watch. "But we only have 8 minutes left." Gabriel took the locket from his pocket and opened it, removing the small golden key with trembling hands. He inserted the key into the safe's lock and turned. For a terrible moment, Julia thought it wouldn't work, that maybe it was the wrong safe. But then there was a click, and the safe door swung open. Inside was a stack of documents, some envelopes, and a small flash drive. Gabriel carefully took everything, his eyes filling with tears as he saw on top of the pile a letter with his name, written in his father's handwriting. "Gabriel," the envelope read, "if you are reading this, it means something has happened to me. Inside this safe is everything you need to know about our family, about your mother, about the people who tried to destroy us. Be strong, my son, and trust the right people. Your loving father." Julia felt tears burn her eyes. She gently touched the boy's shoulder. "Let's take everything and read it later, when we're safe." Gabriel nodded, placing the documents and the flash drive inside the backpack Julia was carrying. They put the painting back on the wall, leaving everything as it was. "We need to go," Beatrice said, already at the door. 3 minutes. They ran out of the office, locking the door behind them. The hallway was still empty, the emergency lights blinking softly. They ran to the service elevator, where Daniel was waiting for them, clearly relieved to see them. "Did you get it?" he asked. "We got it," Beatrice replied. The elevator descended quickly to the garage. Daniel accompanied them to the exit, checking one last time that no one was around. "And good luck with everything," he said before they parted. Julia, Beatrice and Gabriel stepped out into the New York night, their hearts still pounding from the adrenaline. They had done it. They had the contents of the safe. Now they just needed to get back to Philadelphia safely and find out exactly what Edward had left for his son. But as they walked quickly down the sidewalk toward the nearest subway station, none of them noticed the black car parked across the street, or the 2 men inside who were watching them intently. The men picked up their phones and made a call, reporting the location of Gabriel Armstrong and his companions. The hunt had just begun. Beatrice's apartment was shrouded in a tense silence when they finally arrived back in Philadelphia, well past midnight. The bus ride had been agonizing, each stop making Julia look around nervously, expecting to see police officers or worse, the men who worked for Christine. But they had arrived without incident, at least apparently. Gabriel was sitting on the living room sofa, the backpack with the documents on his lap, his hands visibly trembling. Beatrice made tea for the 3 of them, an attempt to calm nerves that were on edge. Julia sat next to the boy, gently touching his shoulder. "Are you ready to read it?" she asked gently. Gabriel nodded, but his eyes revealed his fear of what he might discover. He slowly opened the backpack and first took out the letter his father had left for him. With trembling fingers, he tore open the envelope and unfolded the handwritten pages. Edward's handwriting was firm, decisive, even though the words carried immense emotional weight. "My dearest Gabriel," the letter began, "if you are reading this, it means my worst fears have come true. It means that Christine or the people working with her have finally done what I have been trying to prevent for months. I need you to know the truth, son, the whole truth, even if it's painful. Your mother, Mariana, was the most extraordinary woman I have ever known. We fell in love young and built everything together. This company, our life, you. She was my partner in every sense. But when you were 3 years old, your mother discovered something terrible about some of our business partners. She discovered they were using our company for—" Gabriel paused, his voice choked. The words illegal activities were written here. Julia and Beatrice exchanged a look, the weight of the revelation falling on them like a stone. Gabriel continued reading, tears now streaming freely down his face. Your mother wanted to report them, to do the right thing, but they threatened her. They threatened you, they threatened our family. And then one night she was in a car accident. The police said it was just that, an accident. But I always knew the truth. They took her from me, Gabriel. They took your mother from you." The boy sobbed, clutching the letter to his chest. Julia hugged him, feeling her own tears fall. Beatrice wiped her eyes, also moved. After some time, Gabriel managed to continue. "I spent years investigating, gathering evidence against these people. I documented everything in this safe. But then I met Christine, and like a fool, I believed I could have a second chance at happiness. I didn't realize she was part of the same group that destroyed your mother. Not until it was too late." Julia felt a shiver run down her spine. Christine was connected to the people who had taken the life of Edward's first wife. This was bigger, much bigger than she had imagined. "I recently discovered that Christine is poisoning me," the letter continued. "I found the vials hidden in her room, had the contents analyzed. It's a slow-acting poison that mimics the symptoms of a natural illness. She plans to eliminate me and take over the company, but not for herself. For the same criminals who destroyed your mother. On the flash drive in this safe, you will find all the evidence I've gathered over the years, names, dates, financial transactions, recordings. Everything needed to destroy this organization and get justice for your mother and all their other victims. But Gabriel, you must be careful. These people are dangerous, powerful. Do not trust the regular police. Some of them are on the payroll. Go directly to the FBI, to Prosecutor Henry Sutton. He is an honest man and has been investigating your mother's case for years. Be strong, my son. I know you are young to carry this weight, but I trust you. I trust your courage, your good heart, and trust the right people around you. If you have made it this far, it means someone has helped you, someone believed in you. That person deserves your gratitude and trust. I love you more than anything in this world. Your father, Edward." When Gabriel finished reading, the silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the boy's muffled sobs. Julia held him, feeling the weight of everything they had discovered. Beatrice was pale, processing the implications of it all. "We need to see what's on the flash drive," Beatrice said finally, her voice controlled despite the evident shock. "If there's evidence against these people, we need to know exactly what we have." She took out her laptop and inserted the flash drive. The screen lit up, showing dozens of meticulously organized folders. There were financial documents, audio recordings, photographs, emails. It was a complete archive of years of investigation. Julia began opening the folders, reading the documents with growing horror. Edward had documented everything. A network of influential people using legitimate companies, including his own, to move illicit money. Politicians, businessmen, even some members of law enforcement. It was a web of corruption that stretched throughout the state of New York and beyond. And there, at the center of it all, was the name Christine Sinclair. But it wasn't just Christine. It was the entire Sinclair family. They hadn't lost their fortune through mismanagement, as the official story went. They had lost it because they were investigated and had, with the help of powerful connections, managed to make a deal to avoid prison. In return, they agreed to work for the organization, using their respectable names to lend legitimacy to questionable operations. Christine was planted in Edward's life, Julia realized aloud, reading one of the documents. It wasn't a coincidence that she met him at that charity event. It was planned from the beginning. They wanted control over his company, his international contacts, his import routes. Gabriel was pale, staring at the computer screen as if watching a horror movie. "My mother found all this out," he whispered, "and they killed her for it." Julia touched the boy's face, forcing him to look at her. "But your father didn't give up. He spent years gathering this evidence, and now we have everything. We can get justice not only for him, but for your mother too." "How?" Gabriel asked, his voice filled with despair. "These people are powerful. There are politicians, important people. How can 3 people like us fight against that?" Beatrice closed the laptop, her eyes shining with determination. "With the truth. Your father said to look for this prosecutor, Henry Sutton. If he's been investigating this for years, if he's as honest as your father believes, then he'll know what to do with this evidence." "But how do we get to him without being caught?" Julia questioned. "They're surely looking for us. Gabriel is the son of a wealthy businessman. It's a high-profile case. Our picture is probably in every police station." "We need help," Beatrice said, picking up her phone. "I know someone who can help us. An investigative journalist, Roger Andrews. He's done several reports exposing corruption. If we show this to him, if he agrees to help us—" "It's risky," Julia interrupted. "How do we know we can trust him?" Beatrice looked at her seriously. "We don't. But we have to trust someone, Julia. We can't do this alone. And Roger has a reputation for integrity. I've seen him turn down money from politicians trying to buy his silence." Gabriel stood up from the sofa, wiping his tears and straightening his shoulders. "My father trusted me, and I trust both of you. If you think this journalist can help, Beatrice, then let's find him." Julia looked at the boy with a mixture of pride and concern. Gabriel was growing up too fast, forced by circumstances to mature in a way no child should. But there was strength in him, a resilience she hadn't expected. "All right," Julia agreed, "but we do it carefully, very carefully." Beatrice spent the early morning hours trying to contact Roger Andrews through his professional channels. Finally, at 5 in the morning, she received a reply. Roger was interested, but wanted to meet them in person. He suggested a public place in Philadelphia, a bustling square where they could talk, without drawing attention. They arranged to meet at noon. Julia and Gabriel tried to sleep for a few hours, but sleep didn't come easily. There was too much at stake, too many things that could go wrong. When the time finally came, the three of them dressed in the most discreet clothes they had and headed to the agreed-upon square. Julia kept Gabriel close, her eyes constantly scanning their surroundings, looking for any sign of danger. Roger Andrews was a man in his 40s, with greying hair and a piercing gaze behind thick-rimmed glasses. He was sitting on a bench, pretending to read a newspaper, but Julia could see he was aware of everything around him. When Beatrice approached and identified herself, Roger guided them to a nearby cafe, where they sat at an isolated table in the back. "So," he said bluntly, after they had all ordered drinks, "you said you have information about a corruption network involving powerful people. That's a big claim. I hope you have proof to back it up." Beatrice looked at Julia, who nodded. Gabriel took the flash drive from his pocket and placed it on the table. "This flash drive has years of investigation done by my father, Edward Armstrong," the boy said, his voice firm despite his nervousness. "Everything is documented. Names, transactions, recordings, everything." Roger picked up the flash drive, studying it for a moment before looking at Gabriel with renewed interest. "You're the missing boy, Gabriel Armstrong. Your picture is all over the news. They say you were kidnapped." "I wasn't kidnapped," Gabriel replied. "I'm being protected by people who really care about me." He looked at Julia and Beatrice. "Unlike the woman my father married who is trying to kill him." Roger leaned forward, completely focused now. "Tell me, everything, from the beginning," and Gabriel told him. With the help of Julia and Beatrice, they narrated the entire story. The mansion invasion, the escape, the discovery of the poisoning, the search for the safe, the contents of the documents, everything. Roger listened in silence, occasionally taking notes in a small notebook. When they finished, he was quiet for a few moments, processing it all. "This is bigger than I imagined," he said finally. "If half of what you've told me is true, and if the evidence on this flash drive supports it, we're talking about one of the biggest corruption scandals New York has ever seen." "So you'll help us?" Beatrice asked. Roger looked at the three of them, his face serious. "I'll do more than help. I'm going to expose all of this, but we need to do it the right way. These people are dangerous, and if they find out we're investigating before we're ready, they could destroy evidence or worse, harm you." "What do you suggest?" Julia questioned. "First, I need to verify the contents of this flash drive, confirm the evidence is solid. Second, we need to take this to the FBI and the media, simultaneously. If we publish the story at the same time the authorities are notified, they won't have time to cover it up or make evidence disappear." "And us?" Gabriel asked. "What happens to us?" Roger sighed. "You need to stay hidden until we can guarantee your safety. I have a safe place, a house in the countryside where you can stay. No one will know where you are. In the meantime, I'll work on the evidence and coordinate with Prosecutor Henry Sutton, whom your father mentioned in the letter." Julia looked at Beatrice and Gabriel. It was a lot to trust a stranger, even if that stranger had a good reputation. But did they have a choice? Alone they couldn't get justice. They needed someone with resources, with connections, with experience in handling situations like this. "All right," she finally agreed, "but I'm going with you to check out this so-called safe place before I leave Gabriel there." Roger nodded. "Fair enough. Let's go right now." They left the cafe and got into Roger's car, a discreet, ordinary sedan. They drove for about an hour until they reached a small town outside Philadelphia. The house was simple, single-story, on a quiet street where everyone seemed to know each other. "It's my aunt's," Roger explained as he opened the door. "She's been traveling for months, visiting her daughter in Europe. No one will bother you here." Julia inspected the house carefully. It had 2 bedrooms, a small but comfortable living room and an equipped kitchen. There was food in the pantry and refrigerator, water, everything they would need to stay for a few days. "Okay," she said finally. "We can stay here." "Great," Roger replied. "I'll take the flash drive and start working immediately, but I need you to stay here. Don't leave. Don't talk to anyone, understood?" The 3 of them agreed. Roger gave them a phone number, a prepaid cell phone that couldn't be traced, and said he would contact them every day to update them on his progress. When he finally left, taking the flash drive and all their hopes with him, Julia felt a strange mix of relief and apprehension. They had taken a huge step, trusted someone outside their small circle. Now all they could do was wait and hope they had made the right decision. Gabriel went to one of the bedrooms and lay down on the bed, emotionally and physically exhausted. Beatrice started preparing something for them to eat, and Julia sat on the living room sofa, looking out the window at the quiet street outside. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to think about the future. What would happen after all this was over? If Edward recovered, if Christine and her accomplices were arrested, if the truth came out? Gabriel would go back to his old life. And Julia? What would be her place in this story? She didn't know, but somehow she felt her life would never be the same. Not after everything she had been through, all the courage she had discovered she had, all the love she had developed for the boy fate had placed in her path. "Bea," she called, looking at her cousin in the kitchen, "do you think we did the right thing?" Trusting this journalist, Beatrice stopped what she was doing and came to sit next to Julia. "I think we did the only thing we could do. Alone, we had no way of exposing all this. We needed help, and Roger, at least on paper, seems to be that help. And if he betrays us?" Beatrice took Julia's hand, squeezing it tightly. "Then we'll face that too. But I'm going to choose to believe that there are still good people in this world, people who do the right thing even when it's hard. Like you, Julia. Like you did." Julia smiled, feeling tears of gratitude burn her eyes. "Thank you for everything, Bea. For helping us. For believing in me." "We're family," Beatrice replied simply. "It's what we do." That night, the 3 of them had dinner together, a simple meal of rice, beans, and chicken that Beatrice had prepared. For the first time in days, there was a sense of normalcy, of temporary peace. Gabriel even smiled a few times, telling stories about his school, his friends, a life that seemed so distant now. After dinner, Julia helped the boy get ready for bed. Gabriel brushed his teeth, put on the clean pajamas Beatrice had bought, and lay down in bed. Julia sat beside him, as she had done so many times when he was younger and she still worked at the mansion. "Julia," Gabriel said, looking at her with those eyes that seemed so much older now. "Thank you for everything. For protecting me, for believing in me, for not abandoning me when you could have." Julia felt her heart ache. "I could never abandon you, Gabriel. You're special to me. You always have been." "Do you think we'll succeed?" he asked, his voice small. "That we'll get justice for my mother and my father?" "We will," Julia replied with conviction. "Your father didn't spend years gathering this evidence for nothing, and we didn't come this far to give up now. We will succeed, Gabriel. I promise." The boy smiled, a small but genuine smile, and closed his eyes. In a few minutes he was asleep, his breathing soft and peaceful. Julia stayed there for a few more minutes watching him sleep, feeling a maternal tenderness she never imagined she would feel. When she finally left the room, she found Beatrice in the living room, looking at her phone with a worried expression. "What is it?" Julia asked immediately. Beatrice showed her the screen. It was a news report from a news portal. The headline read, "Businessman Edward Armstrong shows signs of improvement after confirmed poisoning. Police intensify search for missing wife and son." Julia read the article quickly. The doctors had finally identified the poison in Edward's system and had begun specific treatment. He was still in serious condition, but there was hope, and the police were now officially treating Christine as a suspect, though she had not yet been found. "That's good news," Julia said. "It means Mr. Edward can recover." "But it also means the pressure to find Gabriel has increased," Beatrice replied. "They'll intensify the search. And what if Christine is desperate?" "She won't find him," Julia completed, her voice firm. "Because we're going to stop her before that. When Roger exposes everything, when the evidence comes to light, there will be nowhere for her to hide." Beatrice nodded, but the worry was still etched on her face. Julia hugged her, trying to convey a security she herself didn't fully feel. They were in the middle of something much bigger than them, something that could destroy them if they weren't careful. But they were also closer than ever to getting justice, to revealing the truth, to changing the course of everything. And Julia was not going to give up now. Not after everything she had sacrificed, everything she had risked. She was going to see this through, to the end, no matter what it cost. Because some battles were worth fighting, and this was one of them. The next 3 days in the country house were a roller coaster of emotions. Roger called every day on the prepaid cell phone he had left with them, always with updates. On the first day, he confirmed that the evidence on the flash drive was solid, irrefutable. On the second, he said he had made contact with prosecutor Henry Sutton, who was assembling a coordinated operation with the FBI. On the third day, he reported that his story was almost ready, just waiting for the right moment to be published. Julia spent the days taking care of Gabriel and Beatrice, trying to maintain some sense of normalcy amidst the chaos. They cooked together, watched old movies on television, played cards. Gabriel seemed lighter each day, as if sharing the weight of the secret had lifted a burden from his shoulders. But at night, when the boy was already asleep, Julia lay awake, staring at the dark ceiling, thinking of everything that could still go wrong. Christine was still at large, and people with her resources knew how to disappear when necessary. What if she managed to flee the country before the evidence was released? What if her accomplices managed to destroy evidence or buy their way out of prison? It was on the morning of the 4th day, a rainy Wednesday, when everything changed. Julia was in the kitchen making coffee when the prepaid cell phone rang. It was Roger, but his voice sounded different, tense. "Julia, we need to meet, now. There's been a change of plans." "What happened?" she asked, feeling her stomach tighten. "I can't talk over the phone. I'll pick you up in an hour. Be ready." He hung up before she could ask any more questions. Julia rushed to wake up Beatrice and Gabriel, quickly explaining the situation. The three of them got ready in a hurry, packing their few belongings into backpacks, preparing to leave at a moment's notice. When Roger arrived, his face was pale, and there was an urgency in his movements that frightened Julia. "Get in the car, quick," he said, looking nervously down the street. They obeyed, settling into the sedan as Roger sped off, leaving the house behind. Only when they were on the highway at a safe distance did he finally speak. "Christine was found," he said, his eyes fixed on the road. "Or rather, she turned herself in. But it wasn't an ordinary surrender. She hired a high-caliber lawyer and made a proposal. She said she has information to trade, that she can give up even more important people in exchange for a plea deal." Julia felt anger boil in her veins. She's trying to escape the consequences, after everything she's done. "It's worse than that," Roger continued. "She's claiming she was coerced, that the people above her forced her to poison Edward, that she herself is a victim. And there are indications that her lawyers know about the flash drive. Not how, but they know there's evidence circulating." "How could they know that?" Beatrice asked, alarmed. "There's a leak somewhere," Roger replied grimly. "It could be in the FBI, it could be in the DA's office, we don't know. But someone tipped off Christine's defense that there's evidence against her, and now they're in a race against time to discredit that evidence or to make a deal before it becomes public." "So what do we do?" Julia questioned, holding the hand of Gabriel, who was visibly frightened. Beside her. We speed everything up. Prosecutor Henry Sutton is preparing a press conference for this afternoon, where he will announce the operation and release some of the evidence. I will publish my full report at the same time. This way, even if there are people trying to suppress the case, the information will already be public. They won't be able to hide it anymore. And us? Gabriel asked, his voice trembling. You're going to the press conference, Roger replied. Gabriel, you'll have to be brave and tell your story. Tell what your father told you, what you've been through, why you ran away. Your presence will give a human face to this story. It will make people care beyond the numbers and documents. Gabriel turned pale. In front of everyone? Cameras? Reporters? Julia squeezed his hand. You're not alone. I'll be there with you. The whole time. The boy looked at her, and Julia saw the same determination she had seen in Edward's eyes in the old photo from the office. Gabriel nodded slowly. Okay, I'll do it. For my dad, for my mum, for all the people who were hurt by these people. Roger looked in the rear view mirror and smiled, a small but proud smile. You're a brave kid. Your father would be proud. They drove straight to New York, to the U.S. Attorney's Office building. The place was surrounded by police cars and security. When they arrived, they were immediately escorted inside, taken to a room where Prosecutor Henry Sutton was waiting for them. Sutton was a middle-aged man, with completely white hair but sharp, penetrating eyes. He shook each of their hands, but his eyes lingered on Gabriel. You look just like your mother, he said softly. Mariana was an extraordinary woman. I worked with her when she came to me with the first pieces of evidence years ago. If we had had more time, maybe we could have prevented... He trailed off, clearly emotional. I'm sorry for what happened to her, and I'm sorry you were dragged into this. Gabriel held back tears. You knew my mother? I did, and I promised her the last day we spoke that I would get justice. It took years, but we finally have what we need to fulfill that promise. Thanks to your father, and thanks to you. They spent the next hour reviewing what would be said at the press conference. Henry explained that he couldn't release all the details of the investigation yet, that some parts needed to be kept confidential so as not to compromise ongoing operations. But enough would be revealed to ensure the public knew the gravity of the case. When it was finally time for the press conference, Julia felt her hands sweat. The room was packed with journalists, television cameras, photographers. It was intimidating, overwhelming. She looked at Gabriel, who was pale but steady beside her. You can do this, she whispered. Remember, I'm here. Gabriel nodded and squeezed her hand. Henry Sutton stepped up to the podium and began to speak. His voice was clear, authoritative, commanding the attention of everyone in the room. Today, we announce Operation Hidden Truth, an investigation that has taken years and exposes one of the largest corruption and embezzlement networks New York has ever seen. He went on to detail, without yet revealing names, the extent of the network. He spoke of businessmen, politicians, members of law enforcement, all working together to enrich themselves illegally. He spoke of the use of legitimate companies as fronts. He spoke of the victims, people who tried to expose the truth and paid with their lives. And then he looked directly at Gabriel. One of those victims was Mariana Armstrong, a courageous woman who discovered evidence of this network 12 years ago. She was silenced, but her husband, Edward Armstrong, never gave up seeking justice. He spent years in secret gathering evidence, and when his own life was threatened, when he realized he would be silenced in the same way as his wife, he entrusted that evidence to their son, Gabriel Armstrong, who is here with us today. All the cameras turned to Gabriel. The boy stood up with Julia by his side and walked to the podium. Henry placed a hand on his shoulder, a gesture of support and protection. Gabriel, his voice trembling at first but gaining strength as he spoke, told his story. He told of the night of the invasion, of the key his father had given him, of the letter he read, of the pain of discovering the truth about his mother. He told of Julia, who had risked everything to protect him, who had helped him flee, find the safe, and get to this point. When he finished, there were tears in many of the faces in the room. The story of a 12-year-old boy fighting against such powerful forces, protected only by a brave young maid, had touched hearts. The questions from the journalists came in a flood. Gabriel answered some, always with Julia by his side, always with Henry guiding when necessary, and then the prosecutor announced that arrest warrants were being served at that very moment. Dozens of people were being detained in a coordinated operation across the state. Among the names read was Christine Sinclair Armstrong. Charges included attempted murder, criminal conspiracy, money laundering, and involvement in other crimes. Her attempt to negotiate a plea deal was being reviewed in light of the new evidence. When the press conference finally ended, Julia was exhausted. Beatrice hugged her, both of them crying with relief and exhaustion. Gabriel was surrounded by security guards who would ensure his protection until everything was resolved. Roger approached them, laptop in hand. "My story just went live. It's spreading like wildfire. Everyone is sharing it, commenting. You made history today." Julia could barely process it. They had succeeded. After everything, all the risks, all the fear, they had exposed the truth. But then one of Henry's assistants approached quickly, whispering something in the prosecutor's ear. Sutton's face darkened, a grim expression taking over. "What happened?" Julia asked immediately, feeling alarmed. Henry took a deep breath. "Christine escaped custody. She was being transported to an FBI facility when the vehicle was intercepted. Armed men. She was taken." The blood ran cold in Julia's veins. "Does that mean that she still has powerful allies and that she's probably desperate?" Henry looked at Gabriel. "We need to put him in immediate protection, a secure location with 24-hour security." "I'm going with him," Julia said immediately. Henry nodded. "All of you, Beatrice too. Until we can recapture Christine and completely neutralize her network, you are not safe." They were rushed from the building, placed in cars with tinted windows, escorted by FBI vehicles. Adrenaline surged through Julia's veins again. She had thought it was all over, that they were finally safe. But the threat still loomed over them. They were taken to a property on the outskirts of New York, a large, isolated estate that the FBI used for protecting important witnesses. There were armed guards at the gates, cameras everywhere. It was like a prison, Julia thought, but a prison to keep them safe. Gabriel was quiet, processing everything. Julia sat next to him in the room they were assigned, putting her arm around the boy's shoulders. "She's not going to give up, is she?" Gabriel said quietly. "Christine, she's going to try to get me again." Julia wanted to lie, to say everything was fine, that they were completely safe. But Gabriel deserved the truth. "She might try, but there's a huge barrier between her and you now. FBI agents, security guards, prosecutors, and more importantly, the truth is already out there. Everyone knows what she did. She can't hide anymore. But she could hurt me. She could hurt you and Beatrice, to get revenge." Julia turned Gabriel to look him in the eyes. "Listen, I promised I would protect you, and that's what I'm going to do. No matter what happens, Christine will be caught. It's only a matter of time. And until then, we'll stay here, safe, together." Gabriel hugged her tightly, and Julia returned the embrace, her heart aching. That boy had become so important to her. He was no longer just the child she cared for at the mansion. He was almost like a son, someone for whom she would give her own life if necessary. The days at the safe house dragged on with torturous slowness. They had everything they needed in material terms: food, comfort, entertainment. But their freedom was limited. They couldn't leave, couldn't see anyone other than the security guards and occasionally Henry Sutton or Roger, who came to update them on the progress of the investigations. Edward Armstrong, they learned, was recovering well. The treatment for the poisoning was working and the doctors were optimistic. He wanted to see Gabriel, but the doctors recommended waiting until he was stronger. Gabriel spoke with his father through daily video calls, emotional conversations where father and son reconnected, shared their experiences, and cried together. Julia watched these calls from a distance, feeling a mixture of happiness and melancholy. Edward was recovering. Gabriel would eventually be reunited with his father. And then, where would she fit into this equation? Would she just be the maid again? someone who had played her part and could now return to the shadows. But Edward surprised everyone. In one of the video calls, he asked to speak with Julia. When she appeared on the screen, the man had tears in his eyes. "Julia," he said, his voice still weak but sincere, "I have no words to thank you for what you did for my son. You risked everything, your life, your freedom, to protect him. That is more than any father could ask for." Julia, not knowing what to say, just nodded. "I couldn't let anything bad happen to him, Mr. Edward. He's special." Edward smiled, a tired but genuine smile. "When this is all over, when we are finally safe, I want you to know that you will always have a place in our family, not as a maid, as real family. You saved my son, Julia, and for that, I will be eternally grateful." Those words touched Julia in a way she hadn't expected. For the first time, someone from the Armstrong family saw her not just as the maid, but as a person, as someone who mattered. It was on the 12th night at the safe house that everything came to a head. Julia was sleeping when she was awakened by shouts and the sound of gunfire. She leapt out of bed, her heart racing, and ran to Gabriel's room. The boy, now, was awake, hiding behind the bed, his eyes wide with terror. "Julia, what's happening?" Before she could answer, the bedroom door burst open. One of the security guards entered, his weapon drawn. "They've breached the perimeter. We need to get you out of here, now." Julia took Gabriel by the hand and followed the guard down the hallway. Beatrice was already there, escorted by another agent. Outside, they could hear more gunshots, shouts, the chaos of a battle. They were taken to a safe room in the basement of the house, a kind of bunker. The metal door closed behind them with a heavy thud, isolating them from the outside world. But they could still hear the muffled sounds of the fight upstairs. Beatrice was pale, trembling. Gabriel was crying silently. Julia gathered them together, hugging them both, trying to be strong when her own heart was nearly pounding out of her chest. "It's going to be okay," she repeated like a mantra. "It's going to be okay." Minutes passed like hours. The sounds eventually subsided, and then silence. A frightening silence that made Julia imagine the worst. Had all the guards been defeated? Would the intruders come down here, to the bunker, But then a knock on the door. A familiar voice. "It's safe, you can come out." The door opened, revealing Henry Sutton, himself holding a gun, his face sweaty but relieved. "We got them, all of them, and Christine was with them." Julia could hardly believe it. "You got her?" Henry nodded. "She tried one last desperate move, but it didn't work. Now she's in custody, this time in a place she won't escape from, and the last members of her network have also been captured. It's over, Gabriel, it's really over." Gabriel ran out of the bunker up the stairs, as if he needed to see it with his own eyes to believe it. Julia and the others followed him. Outside, in the front area of the property, were several men in handcuffs on the ground, guarded by dozens of FBI agents. And among them, also in handcuffs, was Christine. The woman saw Gabriel, and her face contorted with rage and desperation. "You!" she screamed. "This is all your fault. You should have given me that key. You should have been a good, quiet little boy." Gabriel walked until he was just a few feet from her, Julia by his side. "You killed my mother," he said, his voice firm despite his tears. "You tried to kill my father. You destroyed so many lives, and you think I should have stayed quiet. Never. I will do everything to make sure you pay for every terrible thing you did." Christine tried to say something more, but one of the officers lifted her up and put her in a squad car. The doors closed, silencing her screams of protest. Julia watched the car drive away, carrying with it the woman who had caused so much suffering. And then finally, she allowed herself to breathe. It really was over. Gabriel turned and hugged her, now crying freely, tears of relief, of pain, of grief for all he had lost, but also of hope for the future. Julia held him, stroking his hair, feeling her own tears fall. Beatrice joined them, and the three of them stood there embraced as the sun began to rise on the horizon, painting the sky gold and pink. A new day was dawning, and with it the promise of a different, better future, built on the truth and justice that had finally prevailed. 3 months had passed since that night at the safe house, since the final capture of Christine and her accomplices. 3 months that felt both like an eternity and the blink of an eye. Autumn was beginning to give way to winter in New York, and the mornings brought that characteristic chill that Julia had always associated with new beginnings. She was standing on the porch of Mrs. Rosa's new house, a simple but cozy property in a quiet neighborhood in Queens. Edward Armstrong had insisted on buying it for Mrs. Rosa and Julia, a thank you for their years of loyal service and, more importantly, for saving his son's life. At first they had both resisted, feeling uncomfortable with such generosity. But Edward had been adamant, saying it was the least he could do. Julia sipped her morning coffee, looking out at the garden she had started to cultivate herself. She had planted roses. She had always loved roses, and also some aromatic herbs she used in the kitchen. It was surreal sometimes to wake up in a house that was truly her own, not having to serve anyone, not having to follow strict schedules dictated by employers. Surreal but wonderful. Mrs. Rosa had fully recovered from the injury she sustained on that terrible night. Now retired at 58, thanks to a generous pension Edward had established for her, she spent her days tending the garden, visiting friends, living the life she never had time to live when she worked from sunup to sundown at the Armstrong mansion. Julia, for her part, had finally enrolled in a GED program to finish her high school education. The classes were at night, and she discovered she loved studying, absorbing knowledge, feeling her mind expand with each new concept she learned. She had plans. To go to college afterward, maybe to study education. She had always liked children, and the idea of becoming a teacher enchanted her. But the best part of all was the weekends. Every Saturday, without fail, Gabriel came to visit them. Sometimes he came with Edward, who had also become a frequent visitor. Other times he came alone in an Uber, feeling very grown up and independent at almost 13. Today was Saturday, and Julia was preparing Gabriel's favorite lunch, a full pot roast with all the trimmings. Mrs. Rosa was helping her in the kitchen, the two of them talking and laughing as they worked side by side, as they had for years but now with a completely different weight. They were no longer employees fulfilling obligations. They were free women, preparing food for people they loved. The doorbell rang promptly at noon. Julia wiped her hands on her apron and went to open the door, finding Gabriel on the doorstep, smiling and excited. The boy had grown in these 3 months. He was taller, his shoulders broader, but his smile was the same, sweet and genuine. "Julia!" he shouted, hugging her tightly. "I'm starving. And the whole house already. Smells like pot roast?" Julia laughed, returning the hug. "Get in here before it gets cold." Edward was right behind him, looking much better than the last time Julia had seen him. The poison had left its mark, it was true. He tired more easily and needed regular medical checkups. But the doctors were optimistic, saying that with time he would make a full recovery. The most important thing was that he was alive, present, and for the first time, truly connected with his son. "Mrs. Rosa," Edward greeted, kissing the hand of the woman who had worked for him for so many years. "How are you?" "Well, Mr. Edward, very well," Mrs. Rosa replied with a smile. "But how many times do I have to ask you to just call me Rosa? I'm not your employee anymore." Edward laughed, a sound Julia had rarely heard when she worked at the mansion. "Old habits die hard, Rosa, but I'll try." They sat at the table and Julia served the steaming pot roast. The conversation flowed naturally, comfortably. Gabriel talked about school, about how he was doing better in math, about the soccer team he had joined. Edward shared news about the company, which he was completely restructuring, cleaning out any trace of the illegal operations that had been conducted without his knowledge. And then, inevitably, the conversation turned to the trial. Christine and her accomplices were set to go before a jury in 2 weeks. It would be a public trial widely covered by the media. The case had become one of the biggest corruption scandals in New York's history, and everyone wanted to see how it would end. "Are you going to be there, Gabriel?" Julia asked softly. Gabriel looked at his father, who nodded encouragingly. "I am. Prosecutor, Sutton said my testimony is important, and I want to be there. I want to look at her and all the others and tell the truth. For my mother. for my father, for everyone who was hurt. Julia felt pride swell in her chest. Gabriel had matured so much, had transformed his pain into strength, his anger into justice. "I'll be there with you," she promised, "if you want me to." "I do," Gabriel replied immediately. "I can't imagine doing it without you there." Edward looked from Julia to Gabriel, and there was something in his eyes, a deep emotion he was clearly trying to control. "Julia," he said after clearing his throat, "there's something I want to discuss with you. With both of you." He included Mrs. Rosa. Julia and her mother exchanged curious glances. "What is it, Mr. Edward?" Edward took a deep breath as if preparing for something important. "Gabriel and I have talked a lot in recent months about the future, about family, about what really matters, and we've come to a conclusion." Gabriel was smiling now, clearly already knowing what was coming. Julia's curiosity grew. "Julia," Edward continued, "you did more for my son than I could have ever done in a situation like that. You protected him, guided him, loved him, and Gabriel has told me several times that you are like a second mother to him, that you fill a void that has existed in his life since Mariana was gone." Julia felt tears burn her eyes. "Mr. Edward, Let me finish," Edward asked gently. "I know this might seem strange or inappropriate in some way, but Gabriel and I would like to make it official. We would like you to become his legal guardian. Not to replace anyone, I am still his father and always will be. But so that you have legal rights, so that Gabriel can live with you if he wants, so that you are recognized as the important person you are in our lives." Julia was speechless. She looked at Gabriel, who had tears in his eyes but was smiling. "Please, Julia," the boy said, "it would mean so much to me to have it official, for you to be my real family, not just in my heart." Mrs. Rosa took her daughter's hand, squeezing it tightly. She was crying too. Julia looked from her mother to Edward, to Gabriel, and felt something open up in her chest, a happiness so pure and overwhelming she could barely breathe. She began, her voice choked. "It would be an honor. More than an honor. It would be the greatest gift you could give me." Gabriel got up from his chair and ran to hug her, and Julia held him tight, feeling their tears mix. Edward also stood up, joining the hug, and then Mrs. Rosa, until they were all there, embraced, an unlikely but true family, forged not by blood but by love, courage, and sacrifice. When they finally separated, everyone wiping their eyes and laughing at how much they had cried, Edward took an envelope from his pocket. "There's one more thing," he said, handing the envelope to Julia. "A scholarship. For any university you want, any course you desire. It's my way of saying thank you and also my way of investing in the future of someone I know will make a difference in the world." Julia opened the envelope and saw the official document establishing the scholarship in her name. "Mr. Edward, this is too much. I can't accept." "You can and you will," he said firmly. "Julia, you saved my son. You saved my life. You helped me get justice for the woman I loved and lost. There is no monetary value that can equal that, but I can help you achieve your dreams, and that's what I'm going to do." Mrs. Rosa was crying again, this time tears of pure joy. "My daughter, a college student," she whispered. "Your grandmother would be so proud." Julia hugged her mother, then Edward, then Gabriel again. It was all so surreal, so wonderful, that she feared she would wake up and find it was all just a dream. But it wasn't a dream. It was real. Her new life, her new opportunities, her new family. The days that followed were a mix of preparation for the trial and adjusting to the new reality. Julia began looking through university catalogues, thinking about which course she really wanted to take. Edward initiated the legal proceedings for shared guardianship of Gabriel, and Gabriel, in turn, prepared himself mentally to testify against Christine. When the day of the trial finally arrived, the courthouse was packed. Journalists from all over the country had come to cover the case. Julia entered alongside. Gabriel and Edward, all formally dressed, all nervous but determined. The trial lasted 3 days. Witnesses were called, evidence was presented, arguments were made. Christine, sitting in the defendant's chair next to her lawyers, maintained a defiant expression, but Julia could see the desperation in her eyes. She knew she was lost. Gabriel testified on the second day. In a clear, firm voice, he told everything. The night of the invasion, his father's letter, what he had discovered about his mother, how Julia had protected and helped him. When he finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. Christine tried to defend herself, claiming she had been coerced, that she was as much a victim as anyone. But the evidence against her was overwhelming. The recordings Edward had made, the financial documents, the testimonies of other members of the organization who had made plea deals, everything pointed to her guilt. On the third day, after hours of deliberation, the jury returned with the verdict. Guilty, on all charges, attempted murder, criminal conspiracy, money laundering, and much more. The sentence was read: 25 years in prison, with no possibility of parole for the first 10 years. Christine collapsed upon hearing the sentence, screaming that it was unfair, that she didn't deserve it. But her cries were muffled as the guards led her out of the room. Gabriel watched it all in silence, and when they finally left the courthouse, he took a deep breath, as if shedding a weight he had been carrying for months. "Justice has been served," he said simply. Edward placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "Your mother can finally rest in peace." In the months that followed, life slowly found a new rhythm, a new normal. The story of Julia and Gabriel, of the brave maid who saved her employer's son and helped expose a corruption network, became a book, a documentary, an inspiration for countless people. Julia enrolled in college to study education, starting her classes with a mixture of nervousness and excitement. She was the oldest student in her class, but also one of the most dedicated. Her professors soon realized she had something special, a genuine passion for learning and teaching. Gabriel, in turn, became a symbol of courage for young people across the country. Schools invited him to give talks, human rights organizations honored him, but he remained humble, always saying he had just done what was right, and that he couldn't have done it without Julia. Edward completely rebuilt Armstrong Imports, implementing strict policies of transparency and ethics. The company was no longer just about profit, but about doing business the right way. And it thrived because of it, earning respect in the national and international markets. It was on a Saturday afternoon, almost a year after that terrible night that had changed everything, that Julia had a revelation. She was in the garden of her house, pruning the rose bushes that were now blooming abundantly, when Gabriel arrived for their weekly lunch. "Julia," he called, running to her with an envelope in his hand. It came, the letter from the university. Julia wiped her hands on her pants and took the envelope, confused. "What letter?" "Do you remember I said I wanted to study law so I could help other people like Prosecutor Sutton help me?" "I remember," Julia replied, still not understanding. "Well, I applied for a mentorship program with young people who want to pursue a legal career, and I was accepted. Look here." He pointed to the paper Julia was reading. "My mentor is going to be Henry Sutton himself." Julia felt her heart fill with pride. "Gabriel, that's wonderful." "And there's more," the boy continued, excited. "The program includes community service activities. We're going to help people in need with legal issues, provide support for victims of injustice." "It's exactly what I want to do with my life, Julia. Turn everything we went through into something positive, into help for others." Julia hugged Gabriel, feeling tears of happiness. "Your mother would be so proud of you, and your father is too, I'm sure." "And you, Julia?" Gabriel asked, pulling back a little to look into her eyes. "Are you proud of me?" "More than you can imagine. You took all the pain, all the trauma, and turned it into something beautiful. You are extraordinary, Gabriel." "I learned from the best," he replied with a smile. "You taught me that even when everything seems impossible, even when we're scared, we can choose to do what's right. That courage isn't not being afraid, but acting in spite of it." Julia wiped her eyes, emotional. "Let's go inside and tell your grandmother, Rosa, and your father. They'll be so happy." They walked into the house hand in hand, and Julia had a moment of perfect clarity. Her life had changed completely. She was no longer the invisible young maid who cleaned other people's houses and dreamed of a better future. She was a college student, a legal guardian, a woman who had made a difference in the world, who had saved a life and helped bring justice. But more than any external achievement, more than her own house or a diploma or public recognition, what really mattered was right there, in that moment. Gabriel by her side, Mrs. Rosa in the kitchen preparing lunch, Edward, who would soon arrive with dessert and stories from work. A family unlikely but true, built on love, trust, and mutual sacrifice. That night, after Gabriel and Edward had left, after Mrs. Rosa had gone to bed, Julia sat on the porch of her house, looking up at the starry New York sky. She thought about everything that had happened, all the choices she had made, all the risks she had taken, and she didn't regret a single thing. Because in the end, she had discovered something precious. She had discovered that inside her was a strength she never knew existed. She had discovered that true love, the kind that makes you risk everything for another person, was real and worth every sacrifice. She had discovered that courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to act in spite of it. And most importantly, she had discovered that her life had value, that she was not just the invisible maid, the one who serves and cleans and is never seen. She was Julia Miller, a strong, courageous woman, capable of changing destinies and making a difference in the world. The cool night wind brought with it the scent of the roses she had planted herself. Julia smiled, pulled her jacket tighter around her body, and allowed herself to feel complete gratitude for everything she had, for everything she had achieved, for everything that was yet to come. Her journey had begun on that terrible night, when she had chosen to protect a frightened boy instead of thinking of her own safety. And that choice, that moment of pure kindness and courage, had transformed not only her life, but the lives of everyone around her. Julia stood up from the chair and went inside, closing the door softly behind her. Tomorrow would be Sunday, a day of rest. On Monday she would return to her classes, continue her own journey of learning and growth. But today, in this moment, she allowed herself to simply be at peace. Peace with herself. Peace with her choices. Peace with her past and hopeful for her future. And as she turned off the lights and prepared for sleep, Julia whispered a prayer of gratitude. Gratitude for life, for a second chance, for the family she had found in the most unlikely of places. Because in the end, that was what really mattered. Not the money, not the status, not the external achievements, but the human connections, the shared love, the lives we touch and that touch us in return. Julia Miller, the young maid who became a hero, who became a guardian, who became a college student, who became part of a true family, finally closed her eyes and slept. And in her dreams, she saw a bright future, full of possibilities, built on the solid foundation of everything she had learned, of all the strength she had discovered she had. A future where justice had prevailed, where truth had triumphed, where love and courage had conquered greed and evil. A future full of hope, and of roses blooming in gardens she had planted herself.